Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of the Capitol Corner for the 131st Maine Legislature. My name is Jake Posik. I'm joined by our Director of Policy, Nick Murray, here at Maine Policy Institute, and we're going to unpack this week what happened in the legislature. And primarily, the entire conversation was dominated by Governor Janet Mills' $10.3 billion biennial budget proposal. Kind of sucked all the oxygen out of the room this week. Maine Policy has done quite a bit of work in recent days on this. We put out a statement related to our budget report before the governor released hers. We issued a statement in response, and we've been on radio and in the news talking about what this budget means for Maine. So, Nick, I want to turn things over to you. You know, Governor Mills released this on Wednesday. We got the full budget package released on the Bureau of the Budget website. What did we learn from what the governor put out earlier this week?
Yeah, Jake, like you said, the top line number, $10.3 billion over 2 years, is Mills' proposal, and that's just for the general fund. So that's leaving aside the about $3 billion we receive every year from the federal government, as well as the highway fund, which has about $500 million or more in it, as well as the special revenue funds, which is about another $1.5 billion every year. So when we're just talking about the general fund, it's mostly the discretionary fund. In the state government, it's funded by the revenue sources like income tax, sales tax, corporate tax, things like that. But that was the big top line number, and just to kind of put it in perspective, as the Portland Press Herald had this week as well. When we're talking about this from the baseline number of 9.4 billion. It's a little bit different than what we heard 2 years ago because the state passed about an $8.5 billion budget. In between then, there were some high revenue projections, and so that brings with another $1 billion spent, that brings the baseline to about $9.5 billion. And so you have here the Portland Press Herald noting that it is a 10% increase in the 2-year budget. That's from that initial baseline. If you're talking about from the biennial past 2 years ago, it's over 20% more. But as you noted, that $10.3 billion number, it amounts to about a 10% increase in spending.
Yeah,
So
we got just to butt in real quick. We got to 9.4 million as a result of the last supplemental. But
billion.
if you look at the baseline from the last biennial budget that was negotiated by the legislature, before those supplementals come into account, Nick, we're talking almost $2 billion, aren't we?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so we're starting from about 8.5 billion 2 years ago, and Mills is proposing here another 2 billion on top of that. So that's a billion every year. And I mean, we have to note that this is really out of touch compared to what's happening with, for instance, other Democratic governors or counterparts around the country, you could say. We had Governor Ned Lamont in Connecticut noting that he'll push for a tax cut for the middle class because he's recognizing that the state is bringing in more money than it needs. And so he's talking about, families earning as much to $200,000 per year. So that's joint. I mean, we could say up to $100,000 here in Maine would be a for single filers would be something to look at here. And as well across the country, because of a large budget deficit looming in California, a little bit different than our situation here, even liberal Governor Gavin Newsom is looking at cutting the budget out in California. So that's why when we see this $10.3 billion budget number, we look at it as a pretty radical, a pretty out of touch number in terms of what's happening on the ground. I mean, Mainers are being fleeced by inflation and high costs. Meanwhile, the state's rainy day fund is at a historic level. Revenue projections are coming in 10% higher every year. And it's unfortunate to see that Governor Mills' reaction to that is just to spend 10% more. Especially, Jake, if I could throw up some yearly budget numbers here. This is in real terms, 2021 dollars. So this is accounted for inflation. But this is Maine general fund spending per person over the last 10 or 12 years or so in each fiscal year. So these light green numbers are the Mills budgets in 2021 dollars. Like I said, these orange numbers are what she has proposed. So if you're looking at just before Mills comes into office to now, we're spending almost 10% more per person in real terms. If Mills gets what she wants, that number would rise to about 20% from when she came into office. So we're really seeing a huge increase in spending numbers, and that's why I'm looking forward to bringing up our budget report in public, because we have some recommendations about how we can rein this back and really allow people to expand their lives and expand the economy in a way where it's directed by the people and not by government.
What do you think Mainers are getting out of all of this spending? I mean, as you mentioned, every time we go back to the drawing board on the budget here, the governor spends whatever the projected revenue. The impulse is always to spend it to grow government instead of returning that money to the people. Now, sure, we have had some checks come our way, but it really pales in comparison to the full scale of the relief that could be offered. So, in your opinion, what are Mainers getting from this?
Yeah, it's hard to see how, government spending more is getting people better services, one, right? Because we do rely on government to do some things for us, even though maybe it shouldn't be, but it has been. And so I think people should ask themselves, are they getting more from government? Is government more responsible or more accessible, or does it work better for you if it spends this much more per person? I would imagine folks would probably say no, or it's about the same. And then the other measure is, is the environment that government is setting up for the economy, is that providing growth? Is that providing for families to grow and for businesses to grow and the economy to grow? And, it's really hard to see how that's happened. We barely just got back to the number of jobs that we had before the pandemic. It's taken us a long time to get back to that. And so there are lots of issues, systemic issues in the way that our economy is structured, that increasing government spending is going to keep strangling that. And so if we really want economic growth, we have to look to cut taxes. And that means cutting spending eventually, but we really have to reform the taxation environment so that if we're going to have record revenues, at the least that the state can do is allow folks to plan a little farther in the future and say, hey, your tax rates are actually going to be lower in a couple of years because we're getting so much. Instead, like we've seen, Governor Mills reacts to that and spends almost all of the available revenue coming in for the next 2 years.
So, what are some of those structural reforms that you're talking about? You had alluded a moment ago, mentioning that Maine Policy released its own budget analysis this week. It's a pretty comprehensive document, 105 pages long, and it's heavy on economic modeling, I know, but for you, what are those top line findings? What are the things that lawmakers should be glomming onto as these budget negotiations pick up full speed?
Yeah, it's a big document, and the way that we structured it was to give lawmakers understanding of what parts of state government have spent, and how have they spent their money in the last few years. What has grown reasonably well, what has grown unsustainably. And so we break that down by department level, and folks can get into that if they get into the report itself. But some of the real big top line things that I think lawmakers should take into these budget negotiations is this graph right here. I think shows a lot. I mean, Maine is the blue line here. And as you can see, up to $100,000 for a single filer, that's an income that you earn in a year. You're taxed the most out of any state in New England in Maine. And so that's something that's got to be holding our state back. When we talk about the fact that we have so much revenue coming in, a lot of it is from income taxes and corporate taxes and things of that nature. So we can really, by reforming this chart here, getting us more competitive with these other states, we can attract some more jobs and more economic growth, probably allow some businesses to grow a little bit. And another part of this report is us looking at these different ways of restructuring revenue. And the economists that we work with, this team of internationally recognized economists, we looked at where does the state get its money? And it comes down to the fact that about 90% of the revenue comes from 10 sources. Like I mentioned, income tax, sales tax, corporate tax, things like that. But we have a plethora of dozens of other taxes that only bring in, less than 300 million in a fiscal year. And you look at some of this stuff, real estate transfer tax, estate tax, these are things that are happening on the margins of the economy, likely have a very high compliance burden and an administrative burden to even deal with this on an individual or a business level, and they don't really bring that much into state government. So this is one of the things that we're proposing as well, is get rid of some of these insane licensing regimes and these sort of oppressive bureaucratic regimes, and get rid of the taxes that go with it. Because as much as this is taking from the economy of each dollar that's extracted through taxation, it's the fact that when you fund bureaucrats to enforce more regulation, you put another stranglehold on the economy, and that can also reduce growth. So when we're saying cut these taxes, we're also saying cut these regulatory regimes and really allow Mainers to be more free with how they invest and how they participate in the economy.
So where do you think we go from here? We're very early on. Things are, just going to start picking up in earnest here in the coming weeks. There's still a lot of just paper moving going on in the legislature. Do you think there's an appetite for this among legislative Democrats on the AFA committee or among Governor Mills? Do you rule these reforms out, or do you think there's a chance if the right things fall into place?
Well, the interesting thing about the budget negotiation process is that Governor Mills and Democratic allies in the legislature of hers, they want a 2/3 vote on this budget so that they can pass it in an emergency fashion. This budget could take a number of months, and so they want to take the entire time to build out this budget, and so they need it to pass immediately at the adjournment of session and not wait 3 months. So that means they need a 2/3 vote on enactment and these sorts of things. So that gives Republicans, a minority, some leverage. And so that's why we're trying to frame this in a way and say, hey, we can provide modest structural tax reform and relief to the middle class that folks can plan on, because no one's planning their life on a $450 check coming in however many months from now. They're planning on the environment, the taxation and regulatory environment for the future. And so we're saying, minority Republicans draw this clear line in the sand and say, hey, let's exempt all income earned up to $50,000 for every single filing Mainer. That would be $100,000 for joint filers. And what that would do would be directly targeted to the middle class. We're not saying change the tax code in any other way besides bring in a 0% bracket like we had a number of years ago. Bring in a 0% bracket for those folks who that first $50,000 earned. And I think Republicans can really draw that line. They want to cut below the baseline from what we've heard, and it sounds like Democrats on the Appropriations Committee are kind of leaving everything on the table. So I think Republicans understand that the leverage that they have in this process, they can really make a lot work by drawing a bold line on delivering tax reform.
Thanks for that, Nick. I have to agree. I mean, exempting the first $50,000 earned, that amounts to about $300 million in revenue every year. If we cut that out, I mean, when you look at that's over the 2-year cycle.
Right, and we're gonna get a more exact estimate on that from Maine Revenue Services. So we'll have an updated number. It possibly could be up to 400 million for the 2 years, but that's still within this increase that Mills is proposing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. When you look at that kind of in the backdrop of $900 million in new spending, that doesn't even get you halfway there if we're talking about 450 million, 400 million. So certainly a lot going on, and we're going to follow this, and we're certainly going to continue working on this as it goes. Thank you, everybody, for watching this first episode of the Capitol Corner in the 131st Legislature. Come back weekly. We'll be doing these recaps, talking about what's going on as the session progresses. Thank you very much for watching. Follow us on Facebook to watch these. You can follow us on YouTube as well, youtube.com/@Maine Policy, and you'll be able to find these Capitol Corner videos. So tune in next time, and thank you very much for watching. And thank you, Nick.
Thank you.